This is Living Catholic with Father Don Wolf. Living Catholic is a fresh look at issues confronting each of us today. This show deals with living Catholic, what that means for Catholics, as well as the impact on the rest of society. You certainly don't have to be Catholic to enjoy this show. And now your host, Father Don Wolf.
Welcome, Oklahoma, to Living Catholic. I'm Father Don Wolf, pastor of Sacred Heart Parish and rector of the Shrine of Blessed Stanley Rother. Now, this is the time of the year when young men have entered into the pathway of seminary life. They've been thinking about a vocation, and over the course of time, they've contacted the vocations director who's guided them through the application process. And now that that's all done, they've been accepted, and they're passing these last few months before they head off into the wild blue yonder of the unknown at the seminary. So for them, it's an exciting time. I sympathize with them and with the sense of the great unknown, as well as the building excitement that such a thing can bring. No one can find the answers he doesn't have until he goes to the places where the answers are, which is into the unknown. After all, if you knew the answers, you wouldn't be searching, and you wouldn't have to go anywhere at all. So all you look for lies in the darkness, out beyond the range of your experience. This is why seeking and finding is such an adventure. It's also why testing yourself and crossing over into the darkness is necessary for anyone to have a decent life. Imagine what your life and your future would look like if you never took a chance, never leapt into the unknown, never had the courage to open the doorway to anxiety and mystery. All of those who are waiting to find out, who are poised to begin this journey, therefore, are a little nervous, and they should be. It's important for all of us to have a little glimpse into what they're thinking and to what the future holds for them. I was standing with them about 50 years ago when I made the decision to head off into my own mystery and go into the seminary. A good bit has changed in priestly preparation over this half century, and the concerns of the faculty and the formators of the seminary have progressed from where we were all those years ago. But the mystery is still the same, as is the ultimate question, which is, how do I respond to the voice within me, inviting me to consider the priesthood? And that's where we begin. Every young man who's awakened to the prospect of seminary life has done so because he's had some experience of some stirring in his life. In response to that movement, he's taken the steps necessary to apply to the diocese for formation to the priesthood. Sometimes, for some men, this is a kind of pro forma process because he's thought about the priesthood since he was a child and has always carried it with him as his future project. I don't know how common that is in our day and time, but I do know that many of the older priests described this as their vocational journey. They simply knew they wanted to be a priest from the earliest time they ever thought about it. I was always amazed at their confidence and their certainty because it seemed so easy for them. Indeed, all over the world, the norm for seminary formation was that boys would enter the seminary at age 12 or so and then progress from there all the way through to ordination. In fact, many of the priests from India working in Oklahoma now have this exact story, beginning their formation when they were in the 7th grade or so. And not just in India. When the Bishop of Oklahoma City and Tulsa built the seminary here in Oklahoma City, which is now the Archdiocesan Pastoral Center, it was equipped to begin educating seminarians as young as the 9th grade. At that time, it wasn't thought to be particularly strange that a boy would announce his willingness to study for the priesthood, and the whole diocese, as well as his family, would respond enthusiastically. He would be bundled off to seminary formation, and his adventure would begin then. Several years ago, I visited the largest seminary in the world, which is in Guadalajara, Mexico, and found it to be structured along this model. There were young men there who had entered at this age and were finding their way through the formation process and progressing year after year there. It sounds strange to me because this model is not part of my experience, but at this point, it's hard to argue with the outcome. In that diocese, in Guadalajara, they ordained 140 priests last year and are on track to ordain a similar number or more this year. It's not a model we recognize in our day and time, but it's important for us to affirm that it does work and has worked for centuries in other places. However, no matter how it was structured here in the U.S. in days gone past, in our day and time, it's not a model anyone affirms. In fact, almost the opposite is usually proposed. That is, we have a hard time imagining anyone less than about 30 years old is capable of making an informed and life-giving decision for his vocational choice. As our lives have become more full and our educational and life pathways have become more varied, we seem to find it more difficult to make a definite decision about any vocational choice. This isn't just a comment about priestly formation, it's also the reality when it comes to marriage and parenthood and careers. The timeline continues to expand to meet the possibilities that are provided. Not only are there no more high school seminaries, there are hardly any college seminaries left in the U.S. In our society, we just don't opt to begin until much later, which is fine. This is our society after all. We don't have to conform to a model laid down in a peasant society in which village life trapped a person into the very limited choices available to him at a very, very young age. In that environment, if a young man was not taken out of the normal crisscross of life at a very early age, he would be married and be a father by the time he had scarcely passed into puberty. Bringing a young boy to the seminary to set him up for a life of freedom, for the capacity to make a free decision that wouldn't have been available to him unless he had been taken away from the energy and the expectation of village life, that was the norm. Looking around at some of the situations in the inner cities of our country, we might note that this model might not be so unrealistic even in our day and time. Who knows what might lie in the future for those who are serious about trying to create the possibilities for freedom among those who can hear the Lord's voice. But most of us, we didn't hear the Lord calling when we were children. Most everyone I know heard the voice of God speaking to them somewhere along a more advanced stage in their journey. It's common when we're asked to tell the story of our vocation for us to remind everyone that God was calling us throughout our lives, but it took some particular experience, some exclusive moment for us to identify and then heed the voice we heard. And that's true. God does call us throughout our lives, but it does take a long time to identify what we hear and then to find out how to act on what we're hearing. Not only that, it can take us a long time to find the courage to act on what we are hearing. The upshot is that we in our society today are usually a little older when we go to the seminary than in ages past. In my own experience, the awareness of God calling built in me over some time. I used to have a long story about the people I talked to and the slow dawning of this realization in me as I finally understood how the Spirit was actually moving in my life. Above all, the theme of my story was surprise. I had never once thought about the priesthood, and I had never imagined my life to include going to the seminary until it eventually came upon me. But it did have a beginning, and it wasn't great and glorious, or powerfully moving, or any of those things that we normally think about when we think of moments of religious inspiration. It began actually with just a comment. When I got to OSU, I made a point of finding my way to the Catholic Student Center at St. John's as soon as I got on campus, because I didn't want to miss Mass. In fact, I had the chance to go to Mass on my own initiative for the first time in my life, and I chose to act on it. For all my days, I'd practiced the faith as the product of my parents' expectation. And when I got to the liberating air of Stillwater, I had the chance to make my own decision about what I would do with myself and my faith. And I discovered that the chaplain at the center there offered Mass on Wednesday nights at 10 o'clock, which seemed to be about the perfect time for us college students. So I went. The third or fourth time I was at Mass, he was describing to us the practice of the early church when it came to priests and priesthood. They didn't wait for someone to step up and say he wanted to be a priest, the chaplain said. They would analyze their situation and their needs, and then they would look around at who seemed to have the gifts they needed. And when they'd settled on someone, they'd tell him that he had to become a priest. So, as he was explaining to this at Mass one Wednesday night, the chaplain looked around, and he pointed at me, and he said, they would say, "Don, you should become a priest." That's all he said. There wasn't anything more. There was no follow-up. And to this day, I believe he called me out because I'd served Mass for him one Sunday, and he knew my name. Certainly, I don't think he had another motive. But whatever its origin, this off-the-cuff comment lodged in my thoughts and was never dislodged. Over the semesters I was there, I thought about his words. It was the first time in my life I'd heard the connection between priesthood and my name. Now, that doesn't sound particularly powerful, and it wasn't really, but it was a moment in which I could hear something I had not heard before. More than anything, it got me thinking. At the moment it was said, it was nothing, but like a seed that slips into the crack in the sidewalk and lies there so that when the conditions are right, it begins to sprout and grow. By the time I'd gotten to the 4th semester of school, I was ready to begin thinking that I had to respond to this urge in me. The conditions apparently were right. I wish I had had an overwhelming struck by lightning experience so that I could point to the one moment in which things became clear for me. But it wasn't like that. In fact, when I finally made the decision to interrupt my progress on the pathway of life to that point, I had no clear idea about becoming a priest. All I knew was that I should go to the seminary and find out, which is what I did. And that's where the adventure really began. I admonish young men to listen to what goes on in their lives. Almost no one knows immediately what his direction in life should be without question. We seldom get an answer or a glowing sign about what direction to take. It's always a matter of reading the messages we receive and trying to figure out what they are to mean for us. In The Lord of the Rings, the company of hobbits is always looking to find their way through the labyrinth of possible pathways. Often they find messages written in indecipherable letters and puzzling verse. Part of the journey is learning to read and interpret what they've come across. In the novel, they're always asking around to see who might know what these things mean and what to do with what they know. Discerning a call to a vocation is a lot like that. But the most important element in this search is to make a decision. Eventually, a sign will become useless if you wait so long to figure it out that it doesn't impel you to do anything at all. No sign is without ambiguity, and no invitation is without some mystery. When it comes down to deciding and doing, we have to push forward. Sometimes we have to leap. And as we've already said, that means leaping into the unknown. I've talked to many young men who thought they had a vocation to the priesthood and really did want to do something about it as soon as the signs became clearer. But not one of them I've talked to has ever decided to leap into the unknown and take a chance that he might go and find out. Eventually, they all opted for the conventional, the tried, the trodden pathway. Just once, I wished I could have convinced them that they could find what they're hungered for in the area just before the lightning dawn. That is, in the darkness. But they never did. The first secret to the seminary is to go. The overwhelming truth about the seminary is that it's full of guys who don't know whether they should become priests or not, because it's a place of discernment for everyone. And by that, I mean the faculty at the seminary and the archbishop and the vocations director, they're also trying to determine whether you have an authentic vocation or not. It's never simply a matter of you deciding for yourself about what's going to be good for you. The church is also deciding on whether your inspiration and commitment are authentic and fruitful as well. Everyone enters the seminary as a pilgrim to the truth, both the seminarians as well as the faculty and the formators. If you ask the teachers and the directors at the seminary the principal question when you arrive, should I become a priest? They'd all answer, how should I know? But the seminarian and the faculty are all on the journey to find the true response to that question together. So the first big work at the seminary is to find out about yourself and about your life. Now that may seem blindingly obvious, but it always seems to escape those who first come. Certainly it escaped me. When I arrived, I'd been to school already for 2 years. I'd come through the loss of my mother and the challenging history of growth and maturity that had brought about. More than anything else, I was confident that I knew myself. Whether I should become a priest or not was a question I hadn't settled. After all, I barely knew what a priest was or what he did. But if asked about me, I knew the answer. But of course, I didn't. Seminary helps to focus the question and helps the seminary to begin to find out. That's not a unique journey. Anybody who gets married finds out quickly that a spouse becomes an instructor, a proctor to personal growth. No one knows who he is until he sees himself reflected in the eyes of another. And this growth is hurried and deepened the closer he comes to another, especially one spouse to another. The work of the seminary is to prompt this invitation to personal self-disclosure and growth among all those who come there to listen attentively to the voice of the Lord in their lives. It's not always easy, of course. Ask a couple who've been married for, 5 years, whether it's been easy or not. It most certainly hasn't been. Seminary life isn't easy in this respect either, and the search for truth runs right through the heart. We find out about the life of the Lord in us and the voice calling us by looking into the darkness of the unknown in ourselves. That's where the answer lies. This is all done in the context of education and formation as well. Seminarians go to the seminary to study and to learn. In the old days, the earlier a seminarian could begin to tackle the challenge of learning Latin, the more he would benefit from the extended time he would have to master that difficult subject. This is much less a concern in our day and time, but it doesn't make the challenge of learning any less. After all, in most seminaries in most parts of the U.S. in our day and time, the challenge of language learning hasn't diminished. It's just not Latin. It's been replaced by Spanish. But there are other subjects as well. Every seminarian is challenged with studying the perennial questions of philosophy. Each one has to learn history and psychology. Everybody has to progress through a modicum of learning concerning the sciences and arts, literature, poetry, and writing. Prayer and the spiritual life are also important topics that are part of the curriculum. The seminarian stays busy. It might even be a real workout for him if he's come from, say, a less rigorous academic program, or if he's been studying engineering or technology. Finding himself up to his eyeballs in the humanities can be a real challenge. Over the last generation, the seminary has also been challenged to help its members gain a fuller understanding of their status as persons and believers. This has gone by the title of human formation and has become a major focus in all seminaries. As we're all members of a society that has disintegrated into smaller and smaller subgroups, many young men have never learned to be a part of the main currents of society and have never become aware of the potential for their own humanity. That might sound a little odd until you remember that for many young men of this generation, they haven't even had the experience of sitting down to eat as a family, enjoying the company and the support of family life. Learning something as fundamental as living as a community of people and not just as an agglomeration of individuals is something valuable. It takes time and energy and is often a challenge for those who have not yet learned it. Seminaries are always challenged to do their best with the realities and the situations of their members. Learning to be a person, looking into the potential of the soul, finding out what has so far been hidden and unclear. These are always what the candidate for the priesthood is looking to find. And above all, the seminarian is challenged to have fun. Not in everything and not in each moment, but the overwhelming invitation of seminary life is to have fun there. I tell that to the men in the seminary all the time and invite them who are going for the first time to meet the challenge. They'll be surrounded by a lot of men with whom they share a lot in common, and as a group, they will be of above average intelligence. They'll be focused on the same goals, and they'll have time to form bonds and to play together. In fact, their chances to enjoy their time together will probably never be as full and as rich as it will be at the seminary. If you ever get a chance to talk to priests about their time in the seminary, most of them, at least in the last generation, will tell you about all the fun they had and the clever, witty, good times they've had together. Certainly, it was that way for me. I had fun in the seminary. Not everyone's going to make it all the way to priesthood. In fact, the seminary exists to help everyone who goes to discern what his vocation is. That discernment is as successful if the seminarian decides priesthood is not his calling and he should depart, as if he discerns that he should stay and be ordained. Because the quest for truth requires that each one involved in it be courageous and trusting that the Spirit of God will lead them to the ultimate revelation of where God wants them to be. And sometimes that's not easy. There are some seminarians who are heartbroken to find out they really aren't called to the priesthood, and their wishing it won't make it so. And I have to say, there are some guys who will have to deal with the thundering revelation that they are indeed called to the altar, and God wants them to open their lives to His graces so that they do live their lives as priests. Sometimes They figured it wouldn't be for them. But God is at the bottom of all truth. And in the search for truth, the seminarian is redoubling his search for God. At the end of the search, it is God he is encountering and God he's serving, whatever his decision. And if this is the case, then there is nothing he really need worry about. All vocations are mysteries, not because all choices in life and all callings are strange and unknown. They're mysterious because their roots are nourished in the darkness of the not yet and in the obscurity of the uncertain. We live only by going forward in life face first. No one simply deliberates, decides, and then plugs in what he knows into the machinery of the day-to-day. We're always looking and measuring and trying and failing and succeeding within the energy and restlessness of our walk through our days. Besides, the Lord has called us to himself. We're given the promise of the Lord's accompaniment in all things. As Pope Benedict said, there's nothing sadder than living an uncalled life. When we are called by the Lord's imperative, we're called to his will, which means wherever we end up, it is by the Lord's imperative and the Lord's desiring. We need not worry where it will be or what will happen in our lives. As we find ourselves, we find the true presence of the Lord with us. Invited into the depth of faith, we need not worry. All we have to do is act. Often the door behind us will close before the door in front of us opens. But no matter. If we trust, then we are on the pathway toward the revelation of God's will in our lives. We need not worry. If you know one of the seminarians who are in waiting, then assure them that God's will is sufficient. They should trust it. If you know someone who ought to be a seminarian, don't be afraid to act as they did in the early church and be the voice of the church to tell him he needs to listen, to decide, and to act. And if you are one of those who has been growing in your awareness of the work of God in your life, and you're being led into discernment, then pay attention. God only wants everything for you. That includes the deepest joy and the fullest meaning you could ever find. So listen and trust that this goodness is for you. Above all, hold on to the truth above all truths. God desires you to have a life that will give life to everyone around you. This means you are the object of God's own care. Once you know that, it doesn't matter what mysteries lie in front of you. All of them will be greater than you could ever imagine, because all of them will be for you. Back in just a moment. Welcome back to our final segment, Faith in Verse. We have a poem today called The Morning View. Time and dates become most important when life falters, like a runner who stumbles to notice his footing precious. So when the rhythm of life hiccups and falters, suddenly the limpid breeze of time's passage freshens. And what we took for granted with scarcely another thought, that Thursday follows behind Tuesday in its assigned space, becomes a mystery, the prize that cannot be grasped or bought, which may not come to us even as we wait for it apace. Try just about one bout of illness, an unexpected death, any interruption, and the normal course of life is knocked off kilter until we know only the potential of life's destruction, and fear becomes the lens through which all beauty and hope filters. So grasp each day, each hour, as the gift precious and rare, for no one knows its real potential or its true price. The calendar might be squeezed to become skinny and spare. The warmth of the sunny day's welcome can be easily ice. That's the morning view. The mystery of life and the mystery of goodness lies in front of us always, and we are invited into that mystery because that is also where we find the presence of God. What we do at Living Catholic always is to continue to invite and to encourage everyone into the mystery of God's presence.
Living Catholic is a production of Oklahoma Catholic Radio. To learn more, visit okcr.org.